The girl who learned not to hope. The city never truly slept. It groaned and hummed and muttered to itself through the night, restless even in darkness. Neon signs flickered like tired eyes. Buses sighed at empty stops. Rainwater carried the reflections of streetlights down cracked pavement like liquid gold. And in the narrow space between a boarded-up pharmacy and a rusted metal staircase, a girl lay awake listening. Amira had learned to sleep without surrendering to it. Her body could rest, but her mind stayed alert, half floating near consciousness, ready to jolt upright at the scrape of a shoe, the slam of a door, or the wrong kind of silence. Silence was dangerous. Silence meant something was about to happen. She lay curled on flattened cardboard she had scavenged earlier that day. The cardboard had once carried televisions, the glossy image of a smiling family printed across its side. The father had bright white teeth. The mother leaned into him. The children looked safe. Amira had turned that side face down. She preferred not to look at things she couldn't have. The wind pushed down the alley in thin, bitter streams, slipping through the holes in her sweater like icy fingers. She tucked her hands beneath her arms and squeezed. Her ribs pressed sharply against her skin. Hunger had a way of carving its presence into bone. Above her, the sky was a dull gray curtain. Snow threatened but hadn't fallen yet. It would soon. She could feel it in the air, the kind of cold that carried weight. She closed her eyes. But she did not dream. Dreaming was a luxury. Dreaming meant remembering warmth, and remembering warmth made the cold sharper. Morning arrived without ceremony. A garbage truck roared past the alley entrance, jolting her awake. She sat up instantly, heart pounding, scanning the shadows for movement. Only after a few long seconds did she allow her breathing to slow. Her stomach growled, twisting painfully. It had been nearly a day since she'd eaten anything more substantial than half a granola bar found beneath a park bench. She stood slowly, her knees protesting. Her boots, 2 sizes too big and lined with newspaper, slapped against the pavement as she stepped into the street. The city in daylight was less forgiving. People walked quickly, eyes forward. They moved around her the way water moved around stone, acknowledging her presence only enough to avoid collision. She had once tried smiling at strangers. It had made them uncomfortable. Now she kept her face blank, her chin lowered, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweater to hide their trembling. She knew the bakery's schedule better than her own birthday. They threw out unsold bread at closing time, but sometimes if she arrived early enough she could find scraps from the morning rush. Croissant flakes, a cracked muffin, once gloriously an entire cinnamon roll with only one bite missing. She reached the alley behind the bakery just as the first employees unlocked the front doors. The scent of fresh bread floated through the air like a cruel promise. Her stomach cramped so sharply she had to steady herself against the brick wall. She waited. Waiting was something she was good at. She waited through the morning rush, through laughter spilling out the door as customers carried paper bags warm against their chests. She waited as parents lifted toddlers high enough to peer through the glass display case. She wondered what it felt like to press her nose against that glass without being chased away. By late afternoon, the cold had settled deeper into her bones. She crouched behind the dumpster, knees pulled to her chest. The metal was freezing against her back, but the spot was hidden from the street. Hidden meant safe. Mostly. The back door opened with a metallic groan. Amira froze. Footsteps. 2 sets. She lowered herself further, hopping shadows would swallow her. The first voice she heard was small and curious. "Papa, why does the bread smell sweeter at night?" A child. Her eyes flicked toward the crack between dumpster and wall. A man stepped out holding a black trash bag. He wore a flour-dusted apron and a wool coat thrown over it. His dark hair was streaked faintly with gray at the temples. His face looked tired but not unkind. Beside him stood a little boy bundled in a blue jacket too big for his thin frame. The boy's cheeks were pink from the cold. He held his father's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Amira's chest tightened unexpectedly. The boy's gaze wandered and found her. He didn't recoil. He didn't whisper. He simply blinked, studying her with open curiosity. "Papa," he said softly, tugging the man's sleeve, "there's a girl." The man turned. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Amira braced for it. The narrowing gaze. The frown. The sharp "get out of here." Instead, the man's expression shifted into something unreadable, something thoughtful. He set the trash bag down. Stay here, Sami, he murmured gently. Sami. So the boy had a name. The man approached slowly, hands visible, movements careful, like he was approaching a stray animal he didn't want to frighten. Amira scrambled to her feet, ready to run. But exhaustion betrayed her, her legs trembled. I'm not going to hurt you, the man said quietly. She said nothing. She had heard that before. He stopped a few feet away, respecting the invisible boundary she drew around herself. It's freezing out here, he continued. Have you eaten today? Her jaw tightened. Questions were dangerous. Questions led to involvement. Involvement led to authorities. Authorities led to places with locked doors and cold smiles. He seemed to understand her silence. Instead of pressing, he turned back toward the door and disappeared inside. Amira frowned. Moments later, he returned not with trash, but with a small brown paper bag. Steam curled faintly from its top. He crouched down and placed it gently on the pavement between them, then stepped back. These aren't scraps, he said. They didn't sell, but they're fresh. The scent hit her immediately. Warm bread, butter, maybe even cheese. Her body reacted before her pride could intervene. She stepped forward cautiously, eyes locked on him, and snatched the bag. It burned her fingers pleasantly. Real food. She clutched it to her chest as though someone might steal it. What's your name? He asked. The question lingered in the air. Names were powerful. Names made things real. For a long moment, she considered lying. Amira, she whispered finally. The man nodded once. That's a beautiful name, he said simply. I'm Daniel, and that's my son Sami. Sami waved enthusiastically. Hi. Amira stared. No one waved at hers. Not like that. She didn't wave back. Daniel didn't seem offended. If you ever need somewhere warm to sit for a bit, he said carefully, our apartment's upstairs, you don't have to say yes, but the door there. The door's there. Not a demand, not a command. An option. Options were unfamiliar territory. She swallowed hard and nodded once, not in agreement but acknowledgement. Daniel seemed to understand the difference. Take care, Amira, he said softly. Then he picked up the trash bag and led Sami back inside. The door shut. The alley returned to silence. Amira stood there for a long time, clutching the paper bag like it might vanish if she blinked. Finally, she sank back down behind the dumpster and opened it. Inside were 2 rolls, still warm, a slice of savory pie, and wrapped carefully in wax paper a small pastry dusted with sugar. Her hands shook. She ate slowly at first, savoring each bite. Then faster. Then slower again, forcing herself to make it last. Tears stung unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes. She wiped them away angrily. It was just food. Just bread. It didn't mean anything. But when she lay down that night on her flattened cardboard, her stomach full for the first time in weeks, something inside her felt dangerously close to hope. And hope was more frightening than hunger. Because hunger was predictable. Hope could disappear. The next day, she stayed away. Kindness was suspicious. She had learned that lesson painfully and thoroughly. Still, her feet carried her past the bakery at dusk. Just to look. Through the window, she saw Daniel behind the counter, laughing softly at something Sami said. The boy stood on a stool, trying to knead dough with exaggerated seriousness. The warmth inside the shop glowed golden against the gathering dark. It looked unreal. Like the family printed on the cardboard she slept on. She turned away quickly. This wasn't for her. She belonged to sidewalks and shadows. And yet, that night as snow finally began to fall in thick, silent flakes, she found herself unable to stay in her usual spot. The wind cut deeper. The alley offered little protection. She hugged herself tighter. Her thoughts betrayed her. The door's there. She hated that the words lingered. Hated that they tempted. Hated that part of her wanted to believe them. Snow gathered in her hair, on her shoulders, on the thin fabric of her sweater. Her teeth began to chatter. And for the first time in a long time, fear crept in, not of people, not of shouting or being chased away, but of not waking up. The bakery lights were still on. She stared at the staircase leading to the apartment above. One step, then another. Each felt heavier than the last. She reached the top landing and stood before the door. Warm light spilled faintly from beneath it. Her hand hovered inches from the wood. She could still live, still retreat, still pretend she had never considered this. Her knuckles trembled. Then before she could lose her nerve, she knocked. Softly, almost inaudibly. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then footsteps approached. The door opened. Daniel stood there, sweater sleeves rolled up, dish towel slung over his shoulder. He did not look surprised. "You came," he said gently. And for the first time in years, Amira stepped toward warmth instead of away from it. The door that stayed open. The warmth hit her first. It wrapped around Amira like something alive, soft and steady and impossibly gentle. Heat radiated from a small radiator beneath the window, and the scent of something simmering drifted through the air. Onion, garlic, broth rich and savory enough to make her knees weaken. She stood just inside the doorway, dripping melted snow onto a worn welcome mat that read "Home, Sweet Home" in faded red letters. Home. The word felt foreign in her mind, like a language she had once known but forgotten how to speak. Daniel stepped aside fully. "You can come in," he said again, as though she needed permission twice. She moved carefully, each step tentative. Her boots left wet prints on the wooden floor. She immediately felt ashamed of them. "I'm sorry," she muttered automatically. "For what?" Daniel asked. She gestured vaguely to the floor. He glanced down and shrugged lightly. "Floors can be cleaned." As if it were that simple. Sami appeared from behind the couch, clutching a stuffed dinosaur whose fabric had been loved nearly threadbare. "You came back," he said, eyes wide with honest delight. Amira froze under the intensity of it. No one had ever sounded pleased to see her. "Hi," she managed quietly. Sami grinned. "Papa made soup. It's the good kind with noodles." Daniel shot him a playful look. "We only make the good kind." Sami giggled. The sound bounced off the walls and filled the small apartment with life. It made Amira's chest ache. Daniel knelt by the door and pointed to a pair of slippers. "You can leave your boots there if you want. I've got extra socks too." Extra. The concept was almost absurd. She hesitated, then slipped her boots off. Her socks were damp and thin, one heel nearly worn through. She tried to hide the tear with her other foot. Daniel noticed anyway. "I'll grab some dry ones," he said simply, disappearing down the hallway. Amira stood awkwardly near the couch, clutching her paper bag from earlier as though she still needed proof to justify being there. Sami climbed onto the couch and patted the cushion beside him. "You can sit." She didn't move immediately. The couch looked too soft, too clean, like she might stain it just by existing. "It's okay," Sami insisted, interpreting her hesitation as shyness instead of fear. Slowly she sat at the very edge, spine stiff, hands folded tightly in her lap. Daniel returned with a pair of thick wool socks. He crouched in front of her without hesitation, as though kneeling before a street-worn girl was the most natural thing in the world. "May I?" he asked gently, holding up the socks. Her throat tightened. No one had asked her permission in a long time. She nodded. He didn't touch her skin more than necessary, simply passing her the socks and turning slightly away to give her privacy as she changed them. The small gesture of respect hit harder than the warmth. When she finished, he stood. "Dinner's almost ready." Almost ready. As if she were expected to stay. As if she belonged at the table. The kitchen was small, barely large enough for 3 chairs around the square wooden table. The paint on the cabinets had chipped in places, and one drawer stuck unless pulled at a specific angle. It wasn't grand. It wasn't polished. But it felt lived in. Photos covered the refrigerator, drawings in crayon, snapshots of Sami missing his front tooth, one picture of Daniel holding a baby swaddled in blue hospital blankets. There were no recent pictures of a mother. Amira noticed that too. Daniel ladled soup into bowls and set one in front of her. Steam rose in gentle spirals. She stared at it. Real noodles, chunks of carrot, pieces of chicken. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the spoon. "Careful," Daniel said softly, "it's hot." She nodded but didn't wait long enough for it to cool. The first bite burned her tongue. She didn't care. The flavor spread warmth through her chest and down into her stomach. It wasn't just heat, it was fullness. safety, nourishment. She ate quickly at first, instincts taking over. Sami watched her with open curiosity, then mirrored her speed until Daniel gently placed a hand on his son's wrist. Slow down, buddy, no one's taking it away. No one's taking it away. The words struck Amira like a quiet thunderclap. She slowed. The clink of spoons against ceramic filled the space between them. No one asked her invasive questions. No one demanded explanations. Daniel spoke casually to Sami about school, about a math test, about how flour had exploded everywhere earlier when someone squeezed the dough too hard. It was normal. Painfully, beautifully normal. At one point, Sami leaned toward her. Do you like dinosaurs? She blinked. I guess. What's your favorite? No one had ever asked her that before. She tried to think. They're the Triceratops, she said finally. She remembered reading about it once in a library she had been forced to leave when the staff realized she had nowhere else to go. Sami gasped dramatically, that's mine too. He scrambled off his chair and ran to retrieve a small plastic figurine from the living room. He pressed it into her hands with absolute seriousness. You can hold him. The trust in that simple action made her chest tighten again. She held the tiny dinosaur carefully, afraid she might break something so freely given. After dinner, Daniel washed the dishes while Sami showed Amira his collection of mismatched toys. The apartment wasn't large, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a living room that blended into the kitchen, but it felt expansive compared to the narrow alleyways she knew. She kept glancing toward the door. Mapping exits. Counting steps. Daniel noticed. You're not trapped here, he said gently without turning around. Her head snapped toward him. He dried his hands on a towel and faced her fully. You can leave any time you want, the door isn't locked. She stared. He walked over and deliberately unlocked it, turning the knob to demonstrate. I'll see. Her throat worked silently. Freedom. It was a strange thing to offer someone who had never truly had it. I just thought, he continued carefully, it's too cold to be alone tonight. Alone? The word echoed. She had worn loneliness like a second skin for so long that she almost didn't know how to exist without it. Sami tugged at her sleeve, you can see my room. She allowed herself to be led down the narrow hallway. His room was small but bright. Glow-in-the-dark stars dotted the ceiling. A bookshelf sagged under the weight of picture books and early readers. A drawing taped to the wall depicted 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Is that you and your dad? She asked quietly. And Mama, Sami replied matter-of-factly. Her eyes flicked to him. She's in heaven, he added simply, as though explaining the weather. Amira felt something twist inside her. Loss recognized loss even when unspoken. Sami didn't linger on it. He handed her another toy dinosaur and launched into an elaborate story involving volcanoes and heroic rescues. She listened. Really listened. Because for once someone was talking to her like she was part of the world, not outside it. Later, when Sami's eyelids drooped and Daniel carried him gently to bed, Amira stood alone in the living room. The apartment felt quieter now. More fragile. Daniel returned a few minutes later. There's a spare room, he said. It's small, mostly storage right now, but there's a bed. Her pulse quickened. A bed? For her? You don't have to decide anything long-term, he added quickly, sensing the panic flicker across her face. Just tonight. Just tonight. That was manageable. Temporary things were easier to accept. He led her to the second bedroom. It was modest, 1 twin bed, a small dresser, boxes stacked neatly in the corner. The blankets were plain but clean. She stood in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold. You can leave the light on if you want, Daniel offered softly. She nodded faintly. He stepped back, giving her space again. Bathrooms down the hall, towels are in the cabinet, there's a toothbrush in the drawer if you need it. Need it? As if her needs were expected. As if they mattered. He paused, then added quietly, good night, Amira. Her name's spoken gently. Good night, she whispered back. He closed the door halfway, not fully shut, not fully open. And in between. She stood there for a long moment before stepping inside. The bed dipped slightly under her weight as she sat. It was too soft. Too unfamiliar. She lay down cautiously, muscles tense, waiting for something to go wrong. For shouting, for regret, for the inevitable demand. None came. The radiator hissed softly, pipes clanked faintly. Somewhere down the hall, Daniel moved about quietly. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Her eyes drifted to the ceiling. There were no stars here. No open sky. Just smooth plaster. She should have felt trapped. Instead, she felt held. Tears slipped silently into her hairline. She didn't wipe them away this time. For the first time in years, she allowed her body to sink fully into sleep. Not half aware. Not braced for danger. Just sleep. She woke in a panic. It took a few seconds for her mind to catch up with her surroundings. The soft bed. The pale morning light filtering through curtains. The faint smell of coffee. Not the alleys. Not the cold pavements. Her heart pounded wildly as memory rushed back. The bakery. The soup. The spare room. She bolted upright, scanning for her boots. They were neatly placed by the door. Untouched. No one had taken anything from her. No one had searched her meager belongings. A knock sounded softly. She flinched. Amira, Daniel's voice came through the door. Breakfast is ready, no rush. No rush. She pressed a hand to her chest, willing her heartbeat to slow. Slowly, cautiously, she stood and opened the door. The hallway smelled faintly of toast. Sami bounded toward her immediately. You're still here. The unfiltered joy in his voice was disarming. She blinked. Yes. Daniel stood by the stove flipping pancakes. Pancakes. Golden and fluffy. Morning, he said easily. Did you sleep okay? She hesitated. Yes. The word felt enormous. He smiled, not triumphantly, not possessively, just warmly. Good. She stepped into the kitchen again, unsure of where to stand. Daniel gestured to the table. Sit, I'll bring them over. She obeyed automatically. As she watched him move around the kitchen, comfortable, practiced, something inside her shifted slightly. The door had stayed open. He hadn't changed his mind. He hadn't demanded repayments. He hadn't called anyone to take her away. The simple continuity of kindness felt more miraculous than the soup had. Sami chattered about a drawing he planned to make at school. He asked if she liked syrup or jam. He insisted she take the bigger pancake. Daniel let him talk, interjecting gently when necessary. And Amira listened. And ate. And began, very slowly, to imagine what it might feel like if this wasn't temporary. The thought terrified her. But it no longer felt impossible. Outside, snow continued to fall softly against the window. Inside, warmth held steady. And for the first time since she could remember, the door remained open, not as an escape route, but as an invitation. The word she was afraid to say. Spring did not arrive all at once. It came in hesitant breaths. The snow along the sidewalks thinned into gray slush before vanishing entirely. The wind lost its bite. Buds appeared on the trees lining the street outside the bakery apartment, shy and stubborn all at once, tiny green fists pushing back against the memory of winter. Inside, change came just as quietly. Amira no longer stood near the door. Not every time. At first, she had mapped every exit instinctively, counted the steps from the kitchen to the hallway, slept with her shoes positioned within arm's reach of the bed, folded her few borrowed clothes neatly at the foot of the mattress so she could pack quickly if needed. Daniel never commented on it. He noticed, of course, he noticed everything, but he let her habits loosen on their own. Trust, he seemed to understand, could not be forced open. It had to unfold. School was the hardest part. The building felt too loud, too bright, too full of eyes. The first day Daniel walked her there himself, Sami skipping a step ahead, proudly announcing to anyone who would listen that his sister was coming too. The word startled her. Sister. Daniel had gently corrected him. We're just helping each other right now, buddy. But he hadn't dismissed it either. Helping each other. That felt safer. Amira sat in the back of her classroom that first day, shoulders tight, hands folded in her lap. She answered questions only when directly called upon. She flinched when lockers slammed in the hallway. Her teacher, Ms. Alvarez, spoke gently but clearly, offering her extra time when needed. Daniel had arranged everything quietly: records, enrollment, conversations with administrators. No one asked her about the streets. Not directly. But children were perceptive. They noticed the way she hesitated before accepting offered pencils, the way she carefully folded her lunch napkin and tucked it into her backpack, saving it just in case, the way she ate slowly, even when she had more than enough. The first friend she made was a girl named Leela, who wore mismatched socks and carried a sketchbook everywhere. "You draw?" Leela had asked, spotting the tiny doodles Amira absent-mindedly traced in the margins of her notebook. Amira had hesitated, then nodded. Leela grinned. "Sit with me at lunch." It was that simple. The world, it seemed, was not always as complicated as fear made it. Back at the apartment, routine settled like a soft blanket. Mornings smelled like coffee and toast. Evenings carried the warm scent of bread rising downstairs in the ovens. Sami insisted Amira help him with homework, even when she understood the material faster than he did. Daniel worked long hours at the bakery, but he was always upstairs for dinner, always present, always steady. He never raised his voice. He never made promises he couldn't keep. He asked before entering her room. He knocked. Small things, consistent things. And slowly, so slowly she didn't notice at first, her shoulders stopped hovering near her ears. One afternoon, as she returned from school, she realized something startling. She had walked home without scanning every face, without checking behind her every few steps, without mapping escape routes. She had simply walked. The realization made her stop in the middle of the sidewalk. For a split second, panic surged. Had she grown careless? But then she looked up at the bakery sign swinging gently above the door and felt something else instead. Safety. The word still felt fragile. But it was there. The first time she laughed without thinking, it surprised them all. Sami had attempted to crack an egg for a baking lesson and managed to drop the entire carton instead. Yolks slid across the counter like defeated sons. Shells crunched underfoot. Sami stared in horror. Daniel stared at the mess. There was a heartbeat of silence. Then Sami whispered, "It looks like a chicken crime scene." Amira snorted before she could stop herself. The sound burst out of her, bright and unfiltered. Both Daniel and Sami turned to look at her. Her hand flew to her mouth as if laughter were something inappropriate. Daniel's eyes softened. Sami beamed, "You sound funny when you laugh." She felt heat rush to her cheeks. But she didn't apologize. Not this time. They cleaned the mess together, flour dusting their sleeves, egg clinging stubbornly to the counter. It was chaotic and imperfect and real. And it felt like belongings. But belonging brought new fears. One evening, about 3 months after she first knocked on that door, she overheard Daniel speaking quietly in the kitchen. She had gone to get a glass of water and paused when she heard her name. "Yes, I understand the process," Daniel was saying. His tone was calm but firm. "I've completed the paperwork. Background checks, financial statements, references. I know it takes time." Paperwork. Background checks. Amira's stomach dropped. She stood frozen in the hallway, invisible. "No, she's not aware of the details yet," Daniel continued. "I don't want her to feel pressured. She's been through enough instability." Instability. The word felt clinical, cold. "Yes, I'm requesting permanent guardianship." Permanent. Her pulse roared in her ears. Permanent meant decisions. Permanent meant signatures. Permanent meant the possibility of being evaluated and rejected. Her breath came shallow and fast. What if someone decided she wasn't a good fit? What if they said Daniel wasn't suitable? What if they separated them? Her mind spiraled through worst-case scenarios with practiced efficiency. She retreated silently to her room, heart pounding. The walls suddenly felt closer. The bed felt temporary again. She pulled her backpack from the closet and began packing. Not much, just the few clothes she had, the sketchbook Leela had given her, the small plastic triceratops Sami had insisted she keep. Her hands shook. She didn't want to leave. The realization struck like lightning. She didn't want to go back to the streets. She didn't want to sleep with one eye open. She didn't want to lose this. But wanting made her vulnerable. Wanting meant something could be taken. A knock sounded at her door. She jumped. Amira, Daniel's voice. She didn't answer. The door opened slowly. He took in the sight immediately, the open backpack, the folded clothes, the panic written across her face. His expression didn't shift to anger. It shifted to concern. Hey, he said softly, stepping inside but keeping distance. Talk to me. You're sending me away, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. His brow furrowed. What? I heard you, guardianship permanent. Her voice wavered despite her effort to keep it steady. If they say no. He crossed the room then, kneeling in front of her the way he had that first night. They won't say no, he said firmly. You don't know that. He nodded slowly. You're right, I don't know everything, but I do know this, I am not trying to send you away. She searched his face for any trace of doubt. All that paperwork, she whispered. I'm trying to make sure you don't ever have to worry about being sent anywhere again, he replied gently. Permanent means stability, it means security, it means you get to stay unless you choose otherwise. Choose. The word echoed. You want me to stay. He didn't hesitate. Oh, yes. No conditions, no qualifications. Just yes. Tears burned her eyes. You don't owe me anything, he continued softly. You don't have to call me anything you're not ready to. You don't have to pretend. His voice faltered briefly. I care about you, and I want you safe. The simplicity of it broke something open inside her. No transaction. No debt. Just care. Her backpack slipped from her hands. Sami burst into the room moments later, sensing the tension like children often do. Why is everyone sad? He demanded. Amira laughed weakly through tears. No one's sad, Daniel assured him, pulling Sami into a gentle side hug. We're just talking. Sami looked between them, suspicious. Then he asked the question that had lingered unspoken for months. Does this mean she gets to stay forever? The room went very still. Forever? Amira's heart pounded. Daniel met her gaze. I hope so, he said quietly. Hope? There it was again. Once hope had terrified her more than hunger. Now it felt like oxygen. She looked at Sami, his messy hair, his wide, trusting eyes. She looked at Daniel, the steady presence who had never once made her feel small. And something inside her settled. Not perfectly. Not completely. But enough. Dad, she whispered. The word felt fragile on her tongue. Daniel froze. Sami gasped dramatically. You said it. Amira's cheeks flushed. She had meant to test it silently in her own mind first, to practice alone, but it had slipped out, carried on a tide of emotion too strong to hold back. Daniel's eyes shimmered. He didn't lunge forward. He didn't overwhelm her. He simply opened his arms. She stepped into them. Carefully at first, then fully. He held her like something precious but not breakable. Sami wrapped his arms around both of them, squeezing tightly. Group hugs, he declared. Amira laughed through her tears. This time she didn't cover her mouth. The legal process took time. Social workers visited, papers were signed, interviews conducted. Amira answered questions honestly. Yes, she felt safe. Yes, she wanted to stay. Yes, she trusted him. The day the final approval came, Daniel didn't make a grand announcement. He simply came upstairs from the bakery holding an envelope and set it on the kitchen table. It's official, he said softly. Amira stared at the paper as though it might vanish. Sami cheered. Daniel looked at her, waiting, not for gratitude, not for applause. Just for her reaction. She stepped forward and hugged him again. This time she didn't hesitate. Years later, when spring returned in full bloom, Amira stood outside the bakery with flour dusting her own apron. She was taller now, stronger, her laughter came easily. Inside, Sami, no longer so small, argued about pastry flavors. Daniel moved between ovens with the same steady rhythm he always had. The city still hummed and groaned and whispered to itself at night. But it no longer felt like something she had to survive alone. She had survived the streets. She had endured hunger and cold and fear. But the bravest thing she had ever done was knock on a door. And the bravest word she had ever spoken was the simplest one of all. "Dad,